Welcome. I'm Carl Frederick, and I will be interviewing individuals for Kenosha Voices, an oral history project of the Kenosha County Historical Society in conjunction with Kenosha Community Media. I have worked in newspapers for more than 40 years as an editor and a reporter. 38 and a half of those years were at the Kenosha News. I am also a member of the Kenosha County Historical Society Board. We hope you enjoy these programs. I'm speaking with Leon Pascucci, former president, CEO of Leblanc Corporation. And welcome, Leon. Thank you for taking the time for us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So you worked for the company for quite a while. When did you start?
I started shortly after college, which was 1975. I had started an interior design business as my own enterprise. And then my father really kind of eased me into the family business very gently. And I started kind of part-time in sales, advertising and sales promotion coordinator, I think was my first title. And gradually that took more of my attention and time and interest. And I progressed along that way. I think at some point I was named vice president and then executive vice president and then president and then finally CEO and chairman as well.
Okay, in terms of sales associate, what kind of sales did you do? Did you supervise salespeople? Did you go out on the road? What was that like?
Yes, I did travel. I visited dealers because I needed to see what happened out in the world. But it was primarily, we were doing, print ads, and it was our main focus, as well as we produced an in-house publication, Leblanc Bell. We had stopped it for a long time, and I revived that, and that took a lot of my time initially, and we kept that going for many years.
Okay, and what was that you became president in 1991. During that 16 years, you mentioned sales vice president, executive vice president. When you got up to vice president or executive vice president, what were you doing at the time?
Well, I was really assisting my father. He was the founder and president and chairman, and I did whatever he asked me to do. There was a lot of administrative function, a lot of letter writing, a lot of negotiation and things. I was kind of his right hand for a long time.
Right. Did you travel at all in these jobs?
Oh, yes, a great deal. Our industry is small but active. We have many meetings between state educators and industry-wide and then international music fairs. There's a lot of travel involved, as well as visiting customers and schools.
Right, so schools were predominantly your audience, your clients?
Well, that's where our instruments ended up. They weren't really our primary customers because the customers were the dealers, and the dealers generally rented school instruments. So they played a big part in what we did. And we tried to reach out to educators all throughout. And my father was the first one to start an education department, for example, hiring a prominent music educator who could provide resources for other educators and materials.
Okay. Do you play an instrument?
Oh, yes, I played the clarinet and saxophone, piano, recorder.
Everybody played the recorder, right?
Well, I didn't until, that only came in college, and I played the bass recorder, which was fun. There's only 16 notes to it, so it was very easy.
What was a typical day like in your job when you first started?
Well, no 2 days were alike. That was one interesting thing in corporate management. You meet the challenges of the day. There's always the correspondence and the mail to go through, especially in the earlier years before email and all those things. And working with department heads and sales heads especially. And then you have to deal with all the financial matters, the accountants and managing those affairs.
Okay, how much time did you spend in the plant?
Oh, well, I generally spent at least a few minutes every day and sometimes significant time, depending if there were issues or questions. And we very frequently offered tours of our factory with such interesting work, making musical instruments. And many people would come to Kenosha to see what we did. And that was great fun. And I led many of those tours.
Great. Did you ever get into the nitty-gritty and watch the technicians work on the instruments?
Oh yes, I spent a summer in the factory myself, which was great. I loved the experience and worked in many of the different departments and positions. And yes, I did work with people. It was fun to see what they knew. And then when we acquired our French parent company, we again were trying to transfer a lot of that knowledge back here. And that involved my time as well.
What kind of people did you need to find in order to repair and assemble these instruments?
Well, my father was quite a pioneer in the sense that he hired a great many women initially. This is in the early 50s. They, without being too sexist, they generally have smaller hands and were quite adept, meaning the assembly of parts and then the assembly of clarinets in particular. Great success with women employees. So that's what we were looking for in those jobs. But there were other in the machine shop, which you tool and die makers, punch press operators. There was a variety of skills needed in our factories.
What was the relationship between the employees and the ownership of the company?
Well, I think it was very good. My father was in Kenosha and had deep ties. We had many, many family members. And I guess I'm fortunate that he believed in nepotism. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had a job, I don't. But we hired many husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, and uncles. And that gives a kind of stability, I think, in a family-owned business. And that was very nice.
Was there any socialization or clubs, parties or things between the employees and the ownership?
Oh, there was, yes, because people were very friendly. First, you had all these families, and we sponsored an employee picnic once a year in the summer and invited them to bring their families. And that was a great time for us all to be together. But, and we would have sometimes factory luncheons with everybody. We would for different occasions. And we also had a service pin ceremony every year where we would recognize people's length of service and got everybody together and then had a meal afterwards.
Okay, was there a union at the plant?
No, we had a union in the Elkhorn factory, the Frank Holton company, and that was there when we bought it. There were a couple efforts over the years, but they were always defeated. And naturally, my father was not keen on this and didn't feel it was necessary because we weren't that big. We were only a couple hundred employees. It's not like a couple thousand employees. So we had very good relations.
Good.
I think.
You mentioned that your company had bought the parent. What
Yes.
was the parent company and how did that all come about?
Well, going back to the very beginning, my father was keenly interested in musical instruments and started repairing them as a teenager. And he actually apprenticed at the Holton Company in Elkhorn, which he would later buy, some decades later. And his brother, Ben, had a music store in Kenosha before the World War II. During World War II, my father was the repairman for the Glenn Miller Army Air Force Band and naturally traveled with the band. They went to France and Major Miller was seeking to establish a series of Glenn Miller music stores after the war. So my father was sourcing potential suppliers and he knew very much of Leblanc and Noblet clarinets. So he made a point to meet Mr. Leblanc, which he did. They hit it off spectacularly. And at the time, Mr. Leblanc was looking for a new American distributor. He had been working with John Jacob Astor out of New York, but Mr. Astor would not do anything with the instruments themselves. Mr. Leblanc felt they really needed to be, the clarinets needed to be retested and maybe rebored and tweaked a bit because our climate is so different. And being a product of natural material, wood, it moves. And the humidity from France to Kenosha and the United States is very different. And it needed that extra regulation to make sure the pitch and the tone and the intonation was correct. So, and my father was interested to do that. So they formed a Leblanc company. That was probably 1946 or 7. And Mr. Leblanc said, well, just wait for me. I will be in touch with you. And he finally was. Then in the very early 50s, we incorporated as a corporation. And then we proceeded to grow because the school music programs were going very strong in the 50s and 60s. And then we grew to acquire other companies like we acquired a case maker, and then of course the Holton Company in Elkhorn in 1964, and the Martin Band Instrument Company in the early 70s. So it was a nice progression. I forgot
Okay,
the beginning of
what are your memories of Mr. Leblanc?
Oh, well, he was my godfather and just a wonderful man. You know, he was quite aged to me because he was born in 1900 and he lived to almost 100 years old, which was great. But he was just a gentleman, spoke perfect English with lots of fun slang, and very knowledgeable of the world, and of course, extremely devoted to music and the clarinet in particular. I loved him. He was a wonderful man and showed us great hospitality in France. And I learned so much from him and his lady.
You mentioned the shipment of instruments across the Atlantic Ocean and how they had
Yes.
to be redone or adjusted for
Yes.
pitch and tone. Where did you
Yes.
find people or to be that person to tone them and afterwards?
My father found me, it was mainly musicians, and I know we had wonderful Kenoshans. I remember Johnny Novak worked for us for many years, and Jim Cesario, who taught me the clarinet. They did the testing, but then they would know what needed to be done. Sometimes you would enlarge a tone hole very, very slightly, or you do a difference of the bore, especially the barrel. So we would check all of those things.
Okay.
We found the people who had that ability and who knew what they were doing. So, and we would train them because Mr. LeBlanc shared his expertise tremendously.
Okay. You bought these other companies. Are they also band instrument companies?
Yes, only. We were only a maker of woodwind and brasswind instruments and a few accessories. Yes.
Okay.
Well, it was funny because again, I mentioned my father had apprenticed at the Frank Holton Company as a teenager. Then in 1964, we were negotiating to buy Con at the time, and the deal fell through. So my father called Mr. Holton, and he said, "I've been waiting for your call," and they concluded the deal, I think, in 2 weeks. It was quite nice.
So were you also assembling or manufacturing the professional instruments, or was your focus?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Both, yeah. We started on the wood clarinets, which are usually intermediate and artist, and then we added the plastic-based clarinet in the mid-50s, the Vito clarinet, which was, it became our big volume actually. And in the brass, we did all three: student, intermediate, and professional models.
Can you think of
There's
anybody? Okay, I'm sorry.
There are subtle differences, that's all. I mean, we all have to obey the laws of acoustics. That we can't change.
Yeah.
We can change finish, we can change appearance, we can change materials to a degree.
Can you remember any musical artist who used the LeBlanc instruments?
Oh, yeah. Well, there were so many. On the clarinet, Pete Fountain was probably our premier artist, but we also worked with Buddy DeFranco for many, many years. Eddie Daniels, who's still on the music scene as clarinetist, and Stanley Drucker with the New York Philharmonic. Then in brass, we had Al Hurt and Maynard Ferguson. Miles Davis played our trumpet for many years. And it's funny, he has a reputation for being rather difficult, but he was perfect with our guy who really, Larry Ramirez, who was the acoustician in Elkhorn. They got along perfectly, so it was very interesting. At the end, we were also working with Chris Botti, a wonderful young trumpet player, and we were going to make an instrument, both artist and student model, with him as the endorsee. But the successing company didn't take that up. But that was very interesting as well. And on the French horn, we had Phil Farkas, who was very prominent, and Barry Tuckwell also.
Did world events or just a change in the industry, how did those types of things affect LeBlanc Corporation?
Oh, significantly, because we're a small industry. One minute ad on the Super Bowl would cost more than all of us put together spend in a year on advertising and sales promotion. So we're a small industry, and macro trends do matter. And the 50s and 60s saw a big boom in school populations. Districts were building schools and music programs were thriving. We hit the mid 70s, that stopped. The school population started to decline. And then as you get into later in the 70s, the school budgets were really imperiled, and music programs and arts programs were being cut. And that drastically affected us all through the 80s and 90s. So those big trends do have a big influence on what we were able to do.
And you became the CEO in 2001, is that right?
I think so.
Okay. And then what happened in the years after that?
We did our best to stay above water. Those were tough years. We had, and even look at healthcare. We always had very good health plans for our employees. That's one thing we could do. We could offer very good health benefits. We weren't always able to meet Kenosha wages, but we could in the benefits. Then the healthcare field went crazy, and it was a big challenge to meet how do we provide adequate programs and share. Then we had to share the cost a lot more with the employees.
Okay, then did the company continue long after 2004?
Well, that's a difficult story. We reached the point where we needed more capital to continue, clearly. And even though my father had been extremely generous in never taking dividends, he always turned the profit back to the company. But we were so capital intensive because all of us, banners and manufacturers, financed our dealer programs, who then rented the instruments. So we would carry a dealer typically for 9 months, which is a very long time. So we were in the banking business as well, and that's expensive. So we were at the point in the late 90s where we really needed more capital. So how do you do that? You either find a partner or you sell. And I chose to sell. And we sold to Conn-Selmer, a division of Steinway Piano. They were the largest domestic manufacturers of wind instruments in Elkhart, Indiana. I was given assurances that the Wisconsin factories would continue, Kenosha and Elkhorn. And they had talked to me about bringing their plastic clarinet to Kenosha, which would have been a wonderful synergy. And we were already the low-cost producer in plastic clarinets, so that would have been terrific. And in Elkhorn, we were so good at the French horn. We were the market leader in there, and to add what they did with Kahn would have been wonderful. But they chose to go another way, and they closed the factories, and they've kept the brand names, but moved everything out of Wisconsin. They also closed the French factory, which I think was tragic.
Okay, so how did you feel when Conn-Selmer did not continue with the plastic instruments in Kenosha and Elkhorn? Since it
Absolutely
was
awful. I felt betrayed, and I felt I misled our own people, and that was a horrible time. I was stunned, and there was nothing I could do, but I don't know, it was not good.
Okay, when did the employees end up losing their jobs?
Was it about 2005 when they closed the factories? About then, I think. And fortunately, many of them were already rather aged, had long service, and I don't know that anybody had trouble finding new employment. And many of the employees founded a little club after that, the Leblanc group, and they would get together for coffee, once a month, I think. That was a nice thing.
Okay, how did they feel about the plant closing? Did you meet with them?
Everyone was very kind to me about that. Because I felt awful, and they knew it. But you realize there's certain inevitabilities, I guess, and they were very good about it.
Well, looking back, do you miss working for Leblanc?
Oh yes, because every day was different, and there was such a broad spectrum of things to do and people to meet. It was very interesting. And our company had a global impact, which was very special. And coming from our little town of Kenosha, that was really something. And we could welcome visitors from Japan, from Europe, from South America. It was wonderful. And I do miss those aspects a lot. I don't miss the business side because I never really cared very much about profit and loss and balance sheet and all of those mundane things you have to when you're in business, but I don't miss that part. But I miss the other things as well as the creative outlet, because we were a very creative company in our own field, and that was fun.
Okay, what was the best part of your job or your work at Leblanc?
Boy, that's a hard question. Maybe making a difference, and especially helping my father. He had to juggle so many things, and I know I was a big help, and I was able to do things that advanced what we were doing. And I really enjoyed that. That was very rewarding. And to work with your father, that was a nice thing.
Could you come up with the worst part of the job?
I would say it's the normal pressure of business. I wasn't really well suited to that. The pressure every single month to make your sales targets, to make the profit targets, to make the production targets, because there's so much beyond your control, but you try your best to direct things that will lead you to those results. And sometimes we met them and sometimes we didn't. That was difficult. That was a hard part to take because it's very stressful.
Do you have anything else that you'd like to share about your time there, people that you came across during your years of employment?
We had so many nice groups of people in our employees, and it more or less mirrored the composition of Kenosha. We obviously had many from the Italian American community, many immigrants who became citizens, as well as native borns. But those family groups, at first, I think the Italian Americans were strongest, but we had many Polish, many German, and then with the Martin Company, many Mexican Americans and Hispanic, because we had a factory in Arizona which burned. So in the mid 70s, we bought the Martin plant on the south side of Kenosha and brought many of those employees up. So we had these interesting groups, and that was a lot of fun. And everyone was so welcoming and interested, I think. It was very good.
Well, thank you for your time and the stories and the information about G. Leblanc Corporation in Kenosha.
Oh, I was very happy to share with you, and I'm here anytime.
Thank you.